And we're excited to continue with our program here, where we are going to focus on adapting healthcare to a world in flux. So whether we're talking about the climate crisis, humanitarian crisis, NTDs, there's a lot of uncertainty right now, and we're going to spend the rest of our afternoon talking about how the healthcare sector can adapt to these. I am going to quickly hand it over back to Sara Jerving for our next session. Lead us, Sara.
Thank you so much, Kate. And if I could please be joined on stage with my panelists, that would be great. So we are going to be discussing neglected tropical, maybe we'll do right here, just and pass. Neglected tropical diseases in this session, and I am joined by Dr. Monique Wasunna, who is DNDi Africa Ambassador for Drugs for Neglected Disease Initiative in the center, Thoko Elphick-Pooley, who is Executive Director Uniting to Combat NTDs, and Adam Weiss, who is the Director of Guinea Worm Eradication Program at the Carter Center. Thank you all so much for joining us. So neglected tropical diseases are a hugely important issue in impacting huge swaths of the world's population, but they're often overlooked and underfunded. So we're going to talk a bit about some of those challenges and success stories. So if I could turn to Thoko, and if you could talk a bit about some of the country success stories that you're most inspired by.
Great. Can you hear me? Yes. Excellent. Thank you so much for having us and making room for this very important conversation that is very dear to my heart. So for me, I think I just wanted to talk about two inspiring examples of elimination that we have seen. Two very different countries. One, Togo, which it became the first country in the world to eliminate 4 NTDs, which was extraordinary. And what was extraordinary about this is how political leadership played a big role. Because first of all, a country has to want to eliminate a disease. And they have to embed that within everything the country does, whole of government dedication towards elimination. So that was really key to Togo's success. Secondly, was how they funded their NTD program. I'm always struck that Togo started their LF program through Global Fund. They didn't actually have funding in country, but they embedded their LF. This is a program for eliminating elephantiasis within the Global Fund, and that kickstarted the work. So this was really a good way in which the country looked at innovative ways. If you've got the will, you'll find a way to fund that work. And then a third way was really the community health workers, how Togo was able to mobilize and harness community health workers who are really the engine of NTD elimination. I think we all owe it to all those incredible community health workers, many of them women who drive this disease elimination program, many of them going door to door. So some of you in the room, and somebody has said this to me, of course Togo can eliminate 4 NTDs. Look at Togo on the map. It's a tiny country. You can run from the bottom to the top, you know. Get Kipchoge in Kenya, he can run it in an afternoon. It's a tiny country, you can do that. But what about Mali? A huge country, very complex, complicated issues, eliminated trachoma, one of the leading causes of infectious blindness in the world. This was really thanks to partners like the Carter Center here, over 30 years of dedicated work. And I think for me, Mali is an example of commitment and dedication, not giving up, keeping going, continuing against all the odds. So Mali is a great example. 2 very different countries, one small, one big, different challenging circumstances, but they're common denominators: political leadership, community health workers, dedicated, committed partners who are there for the long haul, who just are not there. You know, some people, they take on a program and then when things are tough, they give up. But the partners that are in the fight against NTDs are partners who do not give up. So those, I think I would say, as my opening gambit, these are the successes that most excite me.
Thank you so much. Adam, switching over to guinea worm. So you guys at the Carter Center work very in close partnership with ministries of health and governments. And can you talk about those partnerships, how you bring them together, and what sort of strengths do you see in them?
Thank you so much. I think we all know that partnerships really come down to building trust and building relationships. At the Carter Center, we're very fortunate to have a very strong leader in President Carter who helped forge many of those relationships and partnerships from a very high level. But what he was able to do was to bring together a cadre of people from the country level, but also internationally, who really focused on building those relationships. Founded in trust and mutual respect, respecting sovereignty of each member state, of local communities' sovereignty over their own challenges and problems, as opposed to helicoptering people in to then solve someone else's problems. So founded in all of that, building relationships requires us all to be active listeners and really making sure that we understand the needs of the communities. And so we've had the fortunate opportunity of working with many governments around the world, primarily for guinea worm in sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East, and Asia, and found many people who also had the drive and commitment and passion, which makes it easy to build partnership. Someone like McCoy Samuel Yibi from South Sudan, who would walk through swamps for days, climb mountains, be in very insecure environments, but always committed to serving his people. And it's very easy for us at the Carter Center to build partnerships and relationships around people who have that passion and commitment and drive. And so that's really what we focus on is finding people who are committed, finding people who have the passion, and making sure that we share tools and knowledge and understanding with each other. And as partners and even donors that help facilitate a lot of good work around the world, it's really about what the communities bring to bear, what the individuals bring to bear.
There we go. Dr. Monique, turning to treatments. So one of the issues with NTDs is there is not always adequate treatments because they're often overlooked and underfunded. And can you talk about the research and development landscape for NTDs, what you see as the gaps, and what are some of the solutions around that?
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, all of you, for coming, and thank you for the invitation. NTDs is closest to my heart. Yeah, so about 20 years ago, there are very few medicines for the use for the treatment of neglected diseases. And in 2003, my organization, Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative, was created to fill the gap, the research and development gap that existed, because the doctors in their fields were very frustrated, and the patients also were desperate, because the treatments that were there were toxic, they're not effective, they are not easy to use, unavailable in some instances, and so my organization then was created to fill that gap. So then in 2003, going forward, the aim, therefore, was to be able to find treatments that would be effective and easy to use, and adapted to the condition. So DNDi then, there were so many frustrations around that time, because the infrastructure for research was not there. There was supposed to be a lot of capacity building had to take place, because some of the countries we were working in had not ever done clinical trials before. So we had to build that capacity to be able to do clinical trials. One has to do clinical trials because it's a highly specialized way of saying that this drug works and this one doesn't work. So that needs to be done. And we needed to do it in the areas where the diseases were, in the endemic areas. So that capacity was not there. So that had to be built. Ethics and regulatory capacity also was fragmented. That also need to be strengthened. lack of funding, there was no money. So I'm creating all these gaps that were there that would impact on the research. However, then, DNDi decided people are dying, and we have developed two strategies. One is a short-term strategy where we then take a registered treatment and see if we can reduce the duration of that treatment or combine it with other treatments so that we can quickly give medicines for patients with neglected tropical diseases, especially in my favorite disease, which is leishmaniasis. So that was one, or repurpose the treatments that are used for other diseases now to be repurposed to use for the NTDs, because that was the quickest. People were dying, so we needed to do something quickly. However, over the years, we also then developed long-term strategy where we're developing treatments from scratch. And of course, that needs partnerships. As Adam is saying, you can't do it alone. A lot of partners, academia, universities, research institutions, everyone, civil society, researchers, everyone has to be involved. You need everyone to be committed and specialists in these areas. And so that the long term, so now we are developing these treatments for leishmaniasis and for other NTDs. We have so far developed 13 treatments in the last 20 years that we have been in existence, 9 of which were developed in Africa, and I'm proud to say that, because they were empowering the communities, the endemic areas to be involved. And I forgot to say that we also work very closely with the governments, because you can't advance policy change without involving government and the World Health Organization.
Thank you.
So partnerships is key.
And just to dig a little bit more on the sustainable financing aspect, Thoko, can you talk about some of the challenges around that and what you see as some of the solutions to make financing more sustainable?
Great question. I was at the World Bank and IMF spring meetings recently, and I think the picture of our global economy was just really one of great concern. So if you look at the African continent particularly, a third of African countries are in debt distress. 12% of revenues are spent on interest payments. We have in Europe right now, those that are watching the European elections, great concern about the rise of the far right. And when that happens, it means that funding for development is just not going to be a priority. On top of that, we've got the great Devex. I think you did an article on the great replenishment traffic jam. We have Gavi, we have Global Fund coming up, we have WHO with their investment round of 7.1 billion. We have IDA 21 in December with, I think, 30 billion per year, which is needed for IDA 21. So you've got, on one hand, this really challenging fiscal space, and on the other, the growing demands for global health and development at the same time, which altogether really paint a concerning picture that we may not be able to meet everything that we need. And when you look at NTD specifically, this is something for me that remains shocking, because you've got these diseases that affect 1.65 billion people on the planet, diseases that are hardwired in the SDGs with some very serious targets to reduce by 90% the numbers of people requiring an intervention against an NTD. If you look when this data was done with the benchmark back in 2015 using 2010 data, right now, it means by 2030, we should reduce that number of 1.65 billion people requiring an NTD intervention down to 200 million. We are nowhere near where we need to be, and money is needed for that with all of these needs. So for us, really, we think that the biggest potential source of financing has to come in the form of grant financing to countries, and IDA 21 is the most important source of financing for countries that will finance neglected tropical diseases. So we're really encouraging a fully replenished IDA 21, and that within IDA 21, there is a focus on elimination diseases. We know that we are only less than half the journey towards 2030, and only 15% of the SDGs are on track to be achieved. So basically, we're potentially looking at a space where the world will be unable to meet its promises made to people. Those promises were made to some of the people affected by neglected tropical diseases, because this is about the leave no one behind agenda. Let's focus on those people that we forgot during the MDGs. And people affected by NTDs were one of them. So for us, we think we appreciate countries are in a huge problem, but IDA 21 for us is really the solution. We think fully funded IDA 21, and an IDA 21 that actually makes room, creates a flagship initiative for disease elimination for countries, so that countries can access that grant financing, not loans, not loans. Countries can't have more loans. They are already in huge debt distress. Grant financing that will enable them to deliver for some of the poorest people, and those are people affected by NTD. So this is our single call to action. Thank you.
Thank you. And in Thoko's opening remarks, she had commented on how community health workers are kind of at the heart of the delivery of treatments and whatnot for NTDs. Adam, I'd like you to talk a little bit more about kind of the importance of how do countries go about ensuring that their workforce is kind of trained in these diseases and have the tools that they need?
Yeah, great question. Fundamentally, it comes down to education, awareness, and providing the tools that your community health workers need. And oftentimes there's a discussion around guinea worm, which started as a very vertical program. But we have to remember that it started as a vertical program because there were no other structures available. And over time, as development has helped to fill some of those gaps, then you can look at a more integrated program and a multi-disease platform or lens through which you train and equip your workforce. But in the case of guinea worm specifically, going from 3.5 million cases per year estimated to just 14 people with guinea worm, of course, the challenges for us now is making sure that that workforce is sustainable in a way that they can continue to look for guinea worm, they can continue to look for polio in places that have eliminated various strains of polio, and making sure, again, that across the health system, the investments from all stakeholders really make sure that that fundamental training is there. Some of that can become institutionalized through the education sector, but oftentimes it's about bridging some of the gaps that the Ministry of Health or other sectors like Ministry of Livestock and Fishery and Environment also have to chip in with some of the technical inputs into training and equipping that workforce. But ultimately, what we deal with on the front lines with neglected tropical diseases is making sure at the community level, the workforce really is every individual in their community. You might have a representative who is a health extension worker or some type of health worker that delivers mass drug administration, but making sure that they're aware of the different signals for various diseases. We often talk about pandemic preparedness. What does that mean? What does that look like for people that don't use cell phones, that don't have access to electricity or basic infrastructure? And so making sure that they have the wherewithal, the knowledge of what these diseases look like, what some of those signals might be, and then what's the structure and system for reporting that information. If there's capacity then to respond, that's where a kind of multi-dimensional surveillance system can be very helpful. But you have to still be able to deliver some type of treatment or care at the end of that road, as opposed to just detecting a disease. Well, then what do you do about that? So I really view that, this is the long game, and making sure that our education systems are built and designed to meet the needs of the communities, which again, very diverse, very different contexts from a place like Syria or Sudan compared to what we might be dealing with in Switzerland. But you still need surveillance, you still need awareness and education.
Thank you. And kind of bouncing off that, Dr. Monique, just once you do have, you've developed treatments, there is that very important step of making sure that it reaches remote places, the last mile, there's the health workers, but there's also the logistic aspects of it. What would you say are the most important components in ensuring that access is there at the last mile?
Yeah, so I think I like to look at it in terms of even research and development. What we do is that we have to embed access right from the beginning when the project is being developed, because we need to know the type of medicine that we are going to develop. Who is it for in terms of the age? Who is it? Is it in terms of the women should also be able, pregnant women should also be able to have these treatments, women of childbearing age, because all these have been excluded from the trials before. So we have to think about them so that at the end, when the treatment is available, all these other questions have been taken into account in terms of how effective, how efficacious do we want it to be? How do we want to give it? Do we want to give it orally? Do we want to give it by injection? What is the best? What is the safety profile of this treatment to be developed? So all these things have to be thought well before. And also in terms of this drug, when it's available, what interactions, how will it interact with other existing drugs? So all these questions have to be answered in the process of the drug development. And so then when you get your drug, then it's a different ball game, because then now is when you need like WHO, yeah, because the results of the clinical trials have just come out. So WHO has to evaluate the studies to see that, truly this drug works. And then, of course, advise the governments, the nations that this drug works and you can, it's a first line or second line and so on. So that advice is a technical advice to countries, because some of the countries who are having these problems don't have that technical expertise. So WHO does that. Together then with the ministries of health have to take their rightful place, because they also have to decide that they want this treatment, because it can't be pushed through their noses or through their mouth. They have to say, we want this treatment. We have also looked at the data and we believe we want it. And then therefore, then they have to change the guidelines. Yeah, the national guidelines have to be changed to accommodate the new treatment. So policy change must take place, because you can't just go from the lab to the patient. It has to go through the policy. So once that is done, the governments then put this drug on their essential medicine list, which means that the country can buy that medicine, they can bring it into the country. Of course, they use their regulatory mechanisms of approval to do that as well. And then after that, it doesn't stop there. So we support also the training, because if we, together our partners, produce this treatment, we have to support the training of the doctors in the field,
Right.
how to use these treatments, and then how
to make sure.
yeah, and all the side effects and everything, we teach them. But then ultimately, there are issues of procurement of these medicines and these systems in country. And I believe that the governments now have to take responsibility for their citizens. Because up till now, we're relying on donations, we're relying on other people. So I think it is high time that we also, who have their problems in our countries, also put in some money to be able to procure treatments and to the last mile, use these treatments for eradicating for eliminating NTDs.
Okay.
I think the R&D, just add one thing, that innovation is key for elimination of NTDs. And so the last mile will need everyone, including treatments and diagnostics. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, just last thought from all of the panelists, just kind of one line or so. What would you like to see out of the international community on NTDs? Thoko?
A fully funded IDA 21 that has neglected tropical diseases as a flagship initiative focusing on disease elimination. Let's get the job done and celebrate success in 2030.
Thank you. Dr. Monique?
Yeah, sustainable funding for research and development would be key, and partnerships. We need everyone in this.
I think we're at a critical moment where political will is the best I've ever seen. In 21 years of working on disease eradication and elimination, the politicians are standing up for the people, generally speaking. And I think making things local, to build off of Dr. Wasunna's comments, developing diagnostics, developing tools locally, whether that's on the African continent or other continents, where they can be used and delivered easily with less supply chain management related issues, being as local as possible.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining us today.